Hello. So, in lieu of writing the two-page book analysis of Frederick Douglass's slave narrative, I took to the video format. There was a approach I could have taken with just a 15-minute audio recording, but I thought this would serve a little more purpose to at least see my facial expressions throughout my analysis. So, thankfully for me, I already read this book in a past class. It was African Experience in the Americas with Professor Papademos. I think that was the title of the course, but it's been a little while, so not exactly the most, it's not fresh in my mind. But so my initial reaction to reading this book originally last semester, I thought it was very eye-opening, but I was doing a research paper one time covering this book, and I was trying really hard to find other narratives from slaves, and I was also trying to look for different literature or prominent works that came out of people who were formerly in slavery, and that was a challenge for me. I found a book, or excuse me, not a book, a research article that did a study way back in the late 1800s, interviewing different people who had either been in slavery themselves or had relatives or grandparents, parents who were, and some of the people that were directly former slaves were of rather old age at that point, so the dialogue wasn't all that cohesive. I mean, fair enough for individuals who were maybe at their later stages in life, but to me, something I found the most interesting about this novel was Douglass's aspiration to learn how to read, especially at the will of living in Baltimore when he was out there learning different trade skills. So I thought from that alone, his skill learning it from the children of the area, and then taking that from the slave owner's wife, who had not been so knowledgeable on the fact that he owned slaves, and then seeing that transition from him being very open with Douglass, and then transitioning that to a much more brute attitude, leaving that out of public eye, and the wife especially at that point starting to not treat him so fairly. I think like throughout the entire novel there's sentiment that no matter what route you go or different circumstances you have as a slave, whether you're out in a field or you're doing household work, you're in a city, there's downfalls to all of it. And something that stood out to me also was his relationship with Covey, and how he was supposed to be the breaker of slaves per se. And I think a line I found was, I have my book up here, it's on Google Play. It's on page 100, the second paragraph, and it's the fifth line, and it says, "Covey was one of the few slaveholders who could and did work with his hands. He was a hard-working man. He knew by himself just what a man or boy could do. There was no deceiving him. His work went on in his absence almost as well as its presence, and he had the faculty of making us feel that he was ever present. This he did surprising us. He seldom approached a spot where we were at work openly, if he could do it secretly. He always aimed at taking us by surprise. Such was his cunning that we used to call him among ourselves the snake." And another line I wanted to mention, it was actually above, was he would spend the most of his afternoon in bed. He would then come out fresh in the morning, ready to urge us on with his words, example, and frequently with the whip. So I think, at least with a little bit of prior knowledge, I could kind of infer the brute reality of that. I mean, obviously, I've never experienced anything like that, and most people can't say they have. But I do think at the same time, the experiences of African Americans in the United States and globally, there's still issues that are yet to be resolved in problematic circumstances. But yeah, so I think something that I also took away was that Douglas, in my eye, or from my view, was very lucky. I think the altercation he had with Covey could have gone a lot worse. I think that it's fortunate that he didn't get killed, at least from the perspective that a lot of other slaves or people who tried to escape captivity killed, lynched, tortured, so on and so forth. And interestingly, with his education level, being able to read and then taking that into the church service, which was illegal, but he would do it anyway. And then the people who came to go to his teachings, who also wanted to learn to read and write, and then the escape plan that came out of that. And that was foiled. And then that was a turning point for him when he was imprisoned. So at that juncture too, I definitely took a moment to ask myself, was he lucky? Was this all kind of a big devised plan? I think at the very least, it wouldn't be unfair to say that there's a good chance he shouldn't have made it through a lot of these circumstances. He could have gotten killed very easily. His journey from Baltimore back down south, and then also, his trip to New York to escape slavery, eventually. And I just think it's very uncommon, and in a sense, this is a groundbreaking in the regards that this was not something anyone's done before. I mean, he was such a embodied picture of slave abolition and civil rights. So I think it's definitely very groundbreaking and set a lot of puzzle pieces eventually for a whole lot of change. But I think throughout the novel there's also a lot of depictions of his everyday life, and it seemed like every chapter, at least, I have my book up here with me, it started with him talking about his masters and sort of engaging in that relationship with them. And so I'm going to go next over to chapter, looks like I'm getting towards chapter 10. Bear with me for a sec. Would have been a lot easier to just do a paper copy of this book, but me being cheap, I'll go whatever route it is I can do things cheaper, because college life. Okay, so now we're here in chapter 9, actually, excuse me. He's talking about his life that he wanted, getting away from slavery. First line goes, "I now come to the part of my life during which I planned and finally succeeded in making my escape from slavery. But before narrating any of the peculiar circumstances, back to what I was saying before, his luck and by chance that everything just seemed to have fallen into place for him, I think he definitely says it right there, narrating any of the peculiar circumstances. Then it goes on to say, my reason for pursuing this course may be understood from the following. First, were I to give a minute statement of all the facts, it is not only impossible, but quite probable that others would thereby be involved in the most embarrassing difficulties. Secondly, such a statement would most undoubtedly induce greater vigilance on the part of the slaveholders than has existed hereafter among them, which would, of course, be the means of guarding a door whereby some dear brother bondman might escape his galling chains. So I think Douglas, in this regard, definitely looks out for other slaves, and that this is a very daunting thing. And, this is not something most slaves are going to get the opportunity to do. So I think there's definitely a sense of humbleness, and other people unsuccessful in this journey, he got to where he is based on a lot of things happening correctly. And I think this novel is it's not the most somber thing I've ever read. I wouldn't say it's like I would say it's the farthest thing from a romanticized slave narrative. But I do think at the same time, this is a very educated and, to the point text of what this individual went through, how it impacted him, and what that means for his future. And obviously, his future came with abolitionist movements, civil rights movements, and really set the tone for what would come next. So I don't find this to be too difficult of a novel to read, but I do think it's something that you have to take seriously as a reader. And I like to think of it as, try and understand what you will never understand. And I guess that's me trying to sound empathetic in a way that I can't step into these shoes. I can't say I've ever experienced anything like this or ever will. But this atrocity that this person went through and the struggles and hardships were worthy of being on paper and causing this big change and notion of uprising. So I give this, this is not a book review. I'm more now analyzing what I've seen and what I think of the text. But this is a very 9 out of 10 read if you're trying to get an inside perspective of slavery and the different roles that might have played. I think the stereotypical depiction of a slave is someone in a field doing backbreaking work and labor all day, but Frederick Douglass really shows different scenarios and places you could be. Baltimore, back down in Maryland in the South, and then the final escape to away from all those places. So I think it's a very interesting read. I think there's a lot to take away from it and a lot to think about. And all of that being said, it's something I can appreciate and make me a little bit more conscious and aware of where things originated, how that affects things now, and also acknowledge that this is one story of millions.